Hello? Can you all hear me? Yes? Okay. Good morning, everybody. This is the second main day for the 4th International Meeting on Zoo Research, Conservation, and Biodiversity. Also, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those online because you're all over the world. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just going to go through some quick notes before we get started with our keynote speaker today. So, like I said yesterday, presenters will be notified when their presentation is going too long. The online participants, please feel free to add your questions to the chats, and we can ask that to the speakers when they're done their presentation. If anyone is interested to give back their badge holders or the lanyards, you can also keep it. But if you're interested to give it back, please let one of us know, Janine, Ruth, Jordan, Philip, or myself. And yeah, you're also welcome to keep them as a memento of the conference. All right, so like we said last time, we have surveys ongoing for the best talk. The best talk can be voted on by the online people and the in-person people, but the best poster will be voted on by the in-person people. And we also have ATF accreditation, so if you are ongoing with your training in the veterinary field, you know that the conference has been allocated 11 hours for you as your kind of like a seminar ongoing workshop. So if you have or would require a certification for that, please let me know. And we want to also thank our sponsors again, our media corporations, the Zoo Scientist, the Journal of Zoological and Botanical Gardens, and as well as the Ecology and Diversity. And I had been remiss yesterday to really thank the great team at the Serengeti-Park Hodenhagen, because again, without them, all our discussions and planning would not come to fruition. So I wanted to thank the gastro team, the Gäste Logistics, Übernachtung, or lodges, the marketing team, the zoology team, and my husband, and everyone else in between. Thank you so much for embracing us, for supporting the event, and for helping us to make it a success. And I thank you all for joining us because you're also supporting and growing this conference with us, so thank you. So like I had mentioned yesterday, we have the flagship species support program where we are working with Save the Rhino International. The name of the project is the Luluwe Imfolozi Park Rhino Monitoring and Security Project. So we hope that you will join us in bidding on a lot of items for the silent auction. You have your sheets in your bag, so when you're done, you can put them in the ballot boxes in the Savannah restaurant. We have the special issue with the Journal of Zoological and Botanical Gardens. So please, if you're interested to submit a manuscript, you have the deadline of April 2025. And obviously, the aim of this issue is to present new and emerging research on animal welfare, conservation impact and challenges, as well as policies for animals in zoos. So it follows the 3 areas of the conference, which would be science policy interaction, comparative animal behavior and adaptations, and animal visitor interactions. So please submit. If you have any questions about it, feel free to let me know. Like I mentioned yesterday, there's the initiative Many Zoos. So again, if you're interested in joining this team of volunteers around the world, they want to bring together animal care professionals and academic researchers who share common goals in research world. I was approached yesterday to help advertise the upcoming Biaza Research Conference 2024. So that would be on July 2nd and 3rd in Fota Wildlife Park in Ireland. So if you're interested, I think abstract submissions are over, but you can still apply to attend. And lastly, we have our next conference, the 5th IMZRCB, from April 2nd to the 5th, 2025. So it would be similar to this year, but we're going to change a lot of things because we continue to evolve as we experience each conference. So it would be hybrid. We have the flagship program, but we would want to change it a little bit. And there will be more networking opportunities, more workshops on site. So if you have ideas of speakers or topics that you would want to share, please let us know at our email address, conference@serengeti-park.de. So that covers everything else. And it is my honor to introduce the next speaker, the keynote speaker for today, Dr. Mariska Kret. She was brought to my attention by my previous supervisor in Leiden University when I did the Euroscholars program, so Dr. Bernhard Hummel, and he said, reach out to Mariska, because I explained to him about the conference, and he thought you would be a really great keynote speaker for us. So I'm glad that it worked out with the planning and that you're here today. So a little bit about Mariska. She works as a full-time professor at Leiden University in the Netherlands, and she leads the Comparative Psychology and Affective Neuroscience Lab. She, in her research, compares humans and great apes in how they express and perceive emotions, because we're very related there. Among other honors, she recently received the Mercator Sapiens Stimulus 2024 prize by the Royal Holland Society of Sciences and Humanities for her work in facilitation of comparative research. With the Psychology Lab on wheels, an electric van converted into a lab, she actively involves people in the research. So, without further ado, Mariska, when you're ready, you can come up. Back and forward.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here, and it's really a great honor to talk about my work, and thank you for the lovely introduction, Idu. So my research on emotions in apes and humans is very, very much inspired by, well, you all know, Frans de Waal, and without him paving the way for many researchers, I think I wouldn't have stood here today to talk about emotions in animals. Frans was really, so he inspired me from a very young age on. I think I have all his books and I read them as a young girl. And later in my career, we even started to collaborate. Wrote an article together, and we were editor-in-chief together at the journal Behavior. Maybe you know that. He was a really good mentor for me, always supportive, always inspiring, motivating. So I wanted to start with thanking him and all the great work that he did. So okay, changing that. Yesterday we've talked a lot about how to protect animals and all the species living on this earth, and also that we humans often make very bad decisions. And even small decisions, like for example, you go to the supermarket, you have this idea in your head that you want to buy toothpaste, for example. You go to the supermarket, and then when you enter home, you open your bag and you find this chocolate bar of Tony Chocolonely. So humans tend to think of themselves as rational beings, but actually very many decisions are really taken on the basis of our intuition and our emotion. And that helps us to make very quick and efficient decisions, but oftentimes we also take, we think too much in black and white, or non-rational decisions can also cause have very bad effects on animal conservation, for example. But even very important decisions are oftentimes taken on the basis of emotion. And I want to illustrate this by showing you one experiment that we did. It's a blind date experiment, and we conducted this at several festivals, including Lowlands. It's a music festival in the Netherlands. And we organized blind dates. So we asked boys and girls, who were all young people at the festival, to enter a dating cabin. And we let them wear eye-tracking glasses, heart rate sensors, and also electrodes on the fingertips to measure arousal. And they were sitting in front to each other, but they could not see each other because there was a shutter in between them. And the shutter went went up and immediately down, so just a couple of seconds. And then participants had to rate how attractive they found the other person and how much they liked the other person, how they were feeling themselves, etc. Then the shutter went up again for 2 minutes, and participants could talk as they wished. And again, they had to fill out some questionnaires after that. And then finally the shutter went up again for another 2 minutes, and they could just look at each other without talking. So that was a lot of fun. And we wanted to know, actually, Eliška Praskova, so she was my former PhD student, now postdoc in my lab, whether this click that you sometimes have with someone that you cannot put into words, that is inexplicable, it's not logic, but you have this click with this person, is that measurable if you look at the physiology of people? Is this click measured, reflected in the physiology? So we measured a bunch of things, but first let me show you how it looked like. So these are actual dates, and the participants are, they are filmed, okay, no, doesn't matter, through the camera on top of the eye tracking rail, glasses, sorry. So here you see the guy filmed from the glasses of the girl and the other way around. And we measured several things, and this is just a snapshot. It's not all of it, but heartbeat, skin conductance, touching the face, nodding, smiling, laughing, etc. And this particular date was quite funny because at the beginning, they were quite well in synchrony. So they were smiling at the same time, nodding, making eye contact, but then all of a sudden it goes out of sync. And what happens at that moment, or just before that moment, I must say, she's asking, how old are you? And then he says, I'm 31. And in her eyes, that's like, I don't know, a fossil or something. It's like really old. And she says, oh no, that's not gonna work. And then from that moment on, they're completely out of sync. Of course, that's an anecdote, but it's, and Frans de Waal actually loved anecdotes, right? In his books, he wrote all those observations that he made and that inspired research later on. But this is not just an anecdote, because also if we look at the data, we could see, and this is here a correlation matrix, that on every level that we measured, so smiling, laughing, nodding, also heart rate and skin conductance, people synchronized. They mimicked, they synchronized. There was a lot of correlation. However, the only thing that really predicted dating success was the synchrony on the level of physiological arousal. So here you have skin conductance, so those electrodes on the fingers, and attraction. And you can imagine that if you're, a blind date at a festival is quite stressful for most people. But if you get stressed and aroused at the same time and together calm down, that helps you to literally become, on the same page, basically. So if you're mimicking another person, if you're synchronizing with a person, you literally become a little bit more similar to that person. And that helps you to predict that person better, which is really nice in social interactions, because we're constantly trying to predict the environment around us. And as social species, we're continuously trying to predict what other people are gonna do. And especially, that's very handy during a blind date, right? Because you want to know what the other thinks about you. So, as I said, there was a lot of non-verbal behavior going on, including smiling. Girls were smiling a lot, but guys were interpreting that as something very positive. But there was no correlation whatsoever between smiling and how much people liked the other person. So people smile for several reasons, right? Not just because they're happy, as people in the field of psychology tend to think. I'm a psychologist, by the way. But smiling is much more complex. People smile to each other on the hallway or when they're nervous. So for different reasons, people can smile. There was also a very large gender difference. And this is best illustrated by another anecdote. So on the first day, we told participants, look, if you want to find out if your dating partner liked you, you have to come back by the end of the day, because we cannot exchange phone numbers on the spot. That was for ethical reasons, not allowed. So with psychology experiments, you have a lot of ethical boundaries. But at the end of the day, people were welcome to come back to this the dating location. But then at 5 o'clock, there was a group of men standing there, and no women whatsoever. So men were much more optimistic and also overestimating their success rate. And yeah, that's what we only did on day one. And we quit after that. So for this experiment, we received the Ig Nobel Prize. And next week, Tuesday, actually, I'm going to pick it up in Denmark. So that's quite exciting. This synchronization of physiological states, it has positive benefits for attraction, but it's not bound to that. We also replicated that in a series of lab experiments, for example, where we looked at successful cooperation and found that if people synchronized, they become better at cooperating with each other. Now, in my research, I compare humans and well, let's say other species of great apes, so bonobos, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and I usually take an experimental approach, or I try to combine as many different methods as possible, including observation, but also including computer tasks, for example. And last week, one of my PhD students, Tom Roth, here in the middle, received his cum laude PhD, and he designed a method, or well, it's the start of it, but we're working towards it, a method to get insight into partner preferences of orangutans using such technologies. So the question is, can we leverage existing hardware and software to measure partner preferences of zoo-housed orangutans? Because, you know, those, well, you know much better than I do, but those females that need to be relocated to another zoo, you can't just try it out, right? You have, yeah, if there is any way to get insight into, what would help, yeah, that would be really good for animal welfare. So we did a couple of experiments, first starting with the question, okay, what do female orangutans like? What do they attend to? What do they find interesting? What do they remember? And then later on, we want to move towards measuring individual preferences. But what we found so far is that female orangutans have an attention bias towards flanged males. So they attend to those longer. Here I have a video. Longer. And also their attention is attracted by it immediately. So here you see your orangutan is drinking. So he's not forced into anything. We just switch on the computer screen and he starts drinking. That's really handy because then his head is stable and we can track the eye gaze with an eye tracker mounted below the computer screen. We have a tiny video in the middle of a keeper talking, and that attracts the attention. They find it really interesting. Their attention is drawn towards the middle of the screen. And then we present two pictures, in this case a flanged and an unflanged, unfamiliar male. So yeah, we found that the attention is drawn towards the flanged males. And we actually started with touchscreen experiments. Is it, I think this is also video. Is it possible to play this? Yeah, thank you. And I've worked with touchscreen experiments with chimpanzees and bonobos, but it was really difficult with the orangutans for several reasons. Of course, they have long hairs, so not all touchscreens work very well. Also, we found that orangutans do everything to keep as calm as possible. So reaction time experiments with using touchscreens is probably not the best way to measure attention bias in this species. So they really tried very hard to spend as little effort as possible. But the eye tracking approach worked really well, and they were quite eager to participate. They wanted to continue, and they really enjoyed it because they get to see other orangutans that they don't know. They were pretty interested in it. Okay. Humans don't have those flanges, of course. They're quite obvious. But what is it then that made participants in the blind date experiment synchronize? I mean, how do people get to synchronize on the physiological level, and how did that help to make them feel attracted to each other? Well, we've done some more experiments and found that even very, very subtle changes in the face can help people to synchronize and are picked up unconsciously. And then I'm talking about, for example, pupil size or a subtle blush on the cheeks. So even those things help to synchronize on the physiological level. So that also means that I think we should redefine what emotional expressions are. And in the literature, there is oftentimes this assumption being made that emotional expressions are direct reflections of our feelings. But we already know that if you look at the smile, this does not always represent happiness, right? A smile is a signal. With a smile, you want to communicate something to another person. To some extent, we do have control over this zygomaticus muscle. But actually, there's a lot of other things going on in our face when we become emotional that we have no control over, such as our pupil size, which dilates not just when it's dark, but also when we get stressed or aroused. And even that is picked up by observers and influences how we interact with other people. And to make it even more complex, emotional expressions are dynamic. They occur in an interaction. So if I'm expressing myself, you may pick that up and change your expression, which is influencing me. So it's going on in a dynamic fashion. And also not without a context. So if I'm smiling in this situation here, maybe you can interpret that as nervousness. But if I'm smiling, I don't know, at the funeral, that would be, would have a quite different meaning. So the context also matters in how we interpret emotional expressions. Together with Lisbeth Sterk and Zena Clay from Utrecht and Durham, my PhD student Eliska and I wrote a review article really stepping back and looking at the psychology and primatology literature in what people and apes do when they experience emotion. How does emotion reflect on the face, on the body, in the voice? And what are the similarities and what are the differences? And also, to what extent do they have control over how they express themselves? And I come to speak about that also later on in the presentation with some experiments. But on the basis of this review, the most striking conclusion was actually that there is a lot of emotion research done in psychology on people, but 99% of that research focuses on acted expressions of pictures and also on how we perceive the emotional expressions of other people. So, for example, you have the work of Paul Ekman, who has studied 6 basic emotion expressions: anger, fear, disgust, happy, sad, surprise. He made pictures of people expressing that, so who acted those expressions, and then did experiments on how people perceive those expressions. But how people actually look like when they are in an emotion, there's not much literature on that at all. There's some infant research, but there is almost nothing. So that's shocking. That was a very shocking conclusion because, well, when you're observing, for example, the chimpanzees or the bonobos with an ethogram, and yeah, we have very careful descriptions of how they look like when they are in certain social context or in a certain situation that might trigger emotion. But from people, there is really, really very little. So what we should do as psychologists more and more is study emotions in the wild. Not that much in the lab, but going into the wild, into different situations, and really, as biologists, code how they behave themselves, how they express in the face, in the body, in the voice, etc. So that is still work in progress. But how do we compare emotional expressions and also how we perceive the emotional expressions of conspecifics? And I want to show you the first experiment that I did. I collected this data, I think, in 2012 already. And I did that with bonobos using a computer task. And this computer task has been done a lot in the human literature. It's very, very simple. It's a touchscreen task. It starts, oh, sorry, that's also a video. Yeah, thank you. It starts with a black dot in the lower middle part of the screen. Maybe. No? Okay. Doesn't matter. So it starts with a black dot in the middle lower part of the screen, and you tap on it, and then two pictures are being presented, an emotional one and a neutral one, for just 300 milliseconds, a flash. And then one of the two is being replaced by another black dot, which they have to tap on. Well, now, if this black dot replaces an emotional image, people tend to be much faster on tapping the dot than when it replaces a neutral image, because emotion attracts attention, and then if this black dot is presented on that location, people are faster. So this is what we also did with, oh, it's crashed. Sorry. Oh yeah, it's a bit blurry, I don't know what happened. Can you still see it okay-ish? Okay. Yeah, it's a shame. It was a beautiful drawing by my PhD student of the setup. Anyway, so we did this touchscreen experiment in the bonobo enclosure. They were not forced into it. They could just freely choose whether to sit behind the computer screen or not. We had a keeper standing there doing some training, body part training simultaneously. So also getting the same amount of food rewards. And we were presenting different types of bonobo emotions, what we, including the keepers, thought bonobos would find emotional. We also asked the keepers to rate all those pictures that we had included on emotional intensity and valence, so positivity or negativity. And we found that bonobos, just like humans, also have an attention bias towards the emotions, and especially to the ones that the keepers indicated that they thought the bonobos would find most arousing or most positive and negative. So the more that the keepers thought that bonobos would think these were emotional, indeed, the most those attracted bonobos' attention. So that was quite nice, I thought. Okay, so with this very simple task, this dot probe task, of course you can measure many different things. You can basically measure what attracts attention, what is relevant to a certain species, to a certain individual. From the human literature, we know that people with depression have an attention bias towards more negative stimuli as compared to more positive stimuli. You can measure a specific phobia. So there's a lot of things, I think, that could be of interest to get insight into the mind of an animal that we could do at the zoo. All right. So in this first experiment, we let the bonobos look at bonobos that they didn't know, so unfamiliar. But then my PhD student and I had the question: well, what happens if we show pictures of their own group mates being emotional? Because, well, emotions are most often shared with close others, right? Also in the case of ourselves. And from bonobos in the wild, we know that they're quite interested in bonobos that they don't know. So when a group of bonobos encounters another group of bonobos, and Frans de Waal also describes that really, really nicely in his book. I don't know the English title of the book, but The Bonobo and the Atheist, I think, where a group of bonobos encounters another group of bonobos, and there is some tension, but eventually there's a lot of sexual encounters and food sharing. And this is very different than when chimpanzees, for example, encounter a group of unfamiliar chimpanzees. So bonobos, also in captivity, are interested in members of their species that they don't know and prefer to share food or to have sex with unfamiliar rather than familiar individuals. And this is work by Brian Hare. So we thought, okay, let's repeat our experiment, our attention experiment, but then using the emotional expressions of familiar and unfamiliar conspecifics. And we did this in humans and also in the bonobos. And what we found was that bonobos had this attention bias towards emotional expressions, especially when they were looking at unfamiliar individuals. But people, and the people I'm talking about, this graph on the right, were actually visitors of Apehul Primate Park in the Netherlands. And in the park, you know, people visit with their friends or with their family. So we immediately took pictures of the person they were visiting with and included those pictures in the computer task. And we found that people had this attention bias towards their own kin and kith, especially when they were showing emotional expressions. But for bonobos, it was the opposite. They were most attracted to the expressions of unfamiliar. So this is, I think, a very interesting difference that we observed, which could maybe be explained by their different evolutionary path. So bonobos evolved in a relatively small area surrounded by the Congo River. And relatively speaking, that was a quite nice environment. There were not that many predators. There was plenty of food available. And this species developed in a relatively xenophilic species, so interested in unfamiliar conspecifics, whereas humans developed in a much more xenophobic species. So this, of course, it may be quite a stretch, but at least the small amount of literature that we have available on bonobos, on research on bonobos, points into that direction. So yeah, more research is on the way and needed. Okay, here is another video of the eye tracking of the bonobo. Bonobo eye tracking. So here you can see this was in the early days. We just started with this. We actually had not even trained her, but she started drinking, and she looked at the screen. For the eye tracking, it's important to first calibrate that so that the eye tracker knows what's left and right, etc. And then two pictures were being presented, a neutral one and an emotional one. And as you can see, we just let the animal free. For the bonobos, we had different kind of attention-grabbing videos of different animals. And then the two pictures that were relevant for the experiment. Okay. So regulating emotions. So from, a lot of people, maybe not you, but a lot of people think that humans are very good at regulating emotions, whereas animals are just have no filter and just express themselves freely. Well, first, I would like to show you an experiment in people where we investigated to what extent people take into account whether other people are around or not in how they express emotions and whether that is something that develops over age. So in this experiment, we had 3 age groups of very young children, 8 to 10-year-old children, and an adult group. And we were specifically interested in the emotions pride and embarrassment. And I'm going to focus on just for time on embarrassment. So we asked people to first sing a song, and this is the setup that we had, and we filmed that song. And then later on, people had to watch it back, the video, either alone or with another person sitting next to them. So yeah, people found that quite embarrassing. So we asked them how embarrassing they thought that was, and you can see that on the left. So they felt more embarrassed with an audience there as compared to without an audience. We also measured the cheek temperature, so blushing, and we found that they blushed more with an audience than without. And we also coded specifically for the coy smile, and this is a type of smile that looks like this, like a shy smile. We found no difference in facial expressions, and not in the coy smile either. So, especially in this measure that people have no control over the way they blush, you can see that they got more stressed with the audience, with the audience there as compared to without. Independent of age. So even those very, very young children blushed more with the audience there when watching themselves sing the song. So this is something that develops very early. This is another video. Yeah. Okay, so there's now no sound, but that doesn't really matter because it's a lot of screaming anyway. This young bonobo gets attacked, is very, very frustrated, gets a tantrum, and then another individual hugs and they calm down. And this is a video by Zena Clay, my collaborator from Durham. And in her research, and she by the way was a postdoc of Frans de Waal, and she showed that bonobos, they really express themselves more with an audience. So they really exaggerate sometimes, if it's useful, their emotional expressions. So this is a bit of a drama queen. But we also designed an experiment to test whether bonobos take audience into account in how they express themselves. And Ilyena Kim and Rafaela Heesen were our 2 postdocs on a joint grant that we got. So we tested 10 bonobos, either in a low audience condition and in high audience condition. I have to say the colors and the text is a bit strange. I see it very sharp and nice on my little screen here, but it's I don't know what happened. I definitely didn't choose the color yellow for the text, so sorry about that. So we had a low audience condition with just a few other bonobos around and a high audience condition. And we let them listen to different sounds. And maybe you could play some of the sounds? If that works.
This might be distress. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe one beep. Yeah. So they were listening to those sounds, either with very few group mates around or with a bunch of them around. And then we measured facial expressions, also gestures. Yeah, I think, yeah, you can stop the sound. Yeah. Thank you. And also we had, we used this thermal camera. I don't know if you're aware of it, but with that thermal camera you can also measure arousal. The technique is still in its infancy, and I am a bit skeptical about it, but it seems quite a promising way to measure arousal non-invasively. So we used it. This is very fresh data. Sorry. Yeah, so please no pictures. Yes, okay, thanks. So what we found was that there was no impact of nasal temperature indicative of arousal on signal presence. But actually what we did found was that if there was a lot of other bonobos around, they were expressing themselves more in terms of gestures and facial expressions. So similar to what we observed earlier in the video of the young bonobo, he was expressing himself a lot, right? We also found that in this experiment, they were more expressive, with group mates around as compared to with very few others around, even though they were as aroused in the low versus high audience condition. Okay. So humans are not unique in the capacity to inhibit, exaggerate, modify emotional expressions. Embarrassment, it's something that humans want to inhibit in the presence of others, but they blush, and that also gets noticed. Distress is something bonobos want to share, and they do share, and they do get help. But I earlier showed you that emotional expressions and the way we mimic each other can influence how we feel attracted during blind date, or also how successfully we can cooperate. So we also designed a cooperation box here and wanted to investigate if emotional expressions impact on how successfully bonobos can cooperate. And this is also a video. They have to pull on a rope simultaneously, but facing each other, so that they could also see each other's facial expressions. So of course this is inspired by the famous rope pull task with the bar, but there they were sitting next to each other, and here they're sitting in front. I didn't see if it was played. Did you see it? Yeah, okay, so then here there is an example of free riding, where a third individual steals the food rewards. So they're pulling. Get stolen. You get some emotional expressions, like a bare teeth display. So this is also still in progress, so please no pictures. What we found so far, this is very badly visible, is that there was more emotional expressions when the cooperation failed as compared to when it was a success, especially in the social condition. So when they had to complete the task together, when they had to pull the rope together, as compared to a control condition where they could achieve this on their own. We haven't looked at mimicry and synchronization yet, because this is still work in progress. Okay, and I now come to the end of my talk. I wanted to conclude by saying that in zoos we have the perfect opportunity to work on public outreach and to educate also the general public in research, and also in how intelligent or emotionally complex great apes, in the case of my research, can be. So we use that opportunity a lot. So we test visitors on the same tasks that the apes are doing, and showing them that the apes are better or similar or different, and really talk also to the visitors about this. Yeah, as Ido mentioned, we have this psychology lab on wheels on the right, an electrical van with all the equipment where we can also give demonstrations. Yeah, and the goal that I have is to show the public that we are not alone on this planet and that there's other intelligent beings, emotionally complex beings, personalities that we should take care of. And for that reason, I think that, that it is really great that some of the zoos also show the research directly to the public, and these are just some examples. So Atlanta Zoo, we have Leipzig, but here IMZRCB in the Netherlands. At the orangutan enclosure, we have the touchscreen and the eye tracking setups also visible for the public. So I'm really happy with that opportunity. Okay, so to conclude, emotional expressions are much more complex than typically studied. They are not acted, they can be mixed, ambiguous. There's common primate expressions that psychologists don't care about, like scratching and yawning, that's in the primatology literature oftentimes studied, but that we psychologists should also study much more. We should learn from each other more and collaborate more. Emotional expressions may or may not have a communicative function, for example, pupil size, but still this can influence other people in their decisions, in the social interactions. Like people, apes express and mimic emotions and also synchronize physiological states, suggesting also that the common ancestor shared these traits. And these findings have important implications for animal welfare, and the techniques may be used to give them more control over their lives, like the Tinder for Orangutan program. That's still in its infancy, but I still think that it has great potential. And zoos provide an excellent opportunity for research, outreach, and for raising awareness. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I thank my team members, my collaborators, the funding, and of course the collaborating zoos for everything. Thank you.
We have a little bit of time for a few questions. So, yes?
Thank you for that. That was incredibly interesting. In a lot of the earlier stuff you were talking about, you correlate attention with attraction. And I wondered whether there's good reasons for doing that. I'm thinking, if I'm suddenly confronted by Jennifer Lawrence and a hyena, I'm going to be watching the hyena. But it's
yeah. So okay. So we did several blind date experiments in people. I showed you one of them, but we also had one experiment where we conducted several tasks, including this touchscreen attention task. We organized a big blind date event. We took pictures of everyone. We had samples of the voice. We had smell, t-shirt smells. Yeah, we had five different things, and we had speed date events. So we also had actual success rates, and we found that if attention was the more the attention was drawn on the computer screen by those pictures, the more likely it was that they were successful in the date. So in people, yeah, and also with ratings on how attractive they found the other person, etc. So in people we can do that, right? We can give a questionnaire and we can correlate those indirect measures with how people actually think or report to think. That's also not a perfect match, of course, but at least we did find that. So that was an experiment conducted by this PhD student, Tom Roth, who started with the Tinder for Orangutan program, together with a PhD student of mine who does all those blind date studies in people. So I teamed them up and, yeah, tried to, I mean scientifically, teamed them up. Yeah, so we do have some indication that those indirect measures are predictive of real dating success in people. But of course, you know, in the long-term vision is to also have these measures and eventually link it to breeding success. But we're not there yet at all. But I really would like to go there. Yeah.
Okay.
It will take a lot of time and effort, but I think it's worth it. Okay.
Hi. Fantastic talk.
Thank you.
Do you know about the uncanny valley effect?
Yes.
Have you? So when you mentioned about the flanges, my immediate thought was like, is there two flanges? Like, can you go too far? Have you tried like modifying this to see?
The flanges.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I didn't show you that, but actually we did many different things. So we, for example, we looked at. We started with symmetry, the symmetry of the face, because we know from the human literature, but also from studies in other animals, that symmetrical faces are indicative of, well, there's a lot of health, correlations with health. It's a marker of health. But there was no attention bias towards more symmetrical faces. Then we also played around with the symmetry of the flanges and the size of the flanges. But, yeah, the uncanny valley, so if you would make them too big, for example.
Yeah, if you make them certain features too big or certain features totally missing.
Yeah, like so in this experiment, we just had natural pictures of males who had those flanges as compared to males who did not have those flanges. So that was all natural. But in order to give an answer to your question, we would need an experiment where we would have very large ones and then smaller ones, and then really see what it is.
Or totally unnatural ones.
And totally unnatural ones, maybe even different color or something.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be super interesting to see,
what it is.
What aspect of it.
Do you have any expectations what it is?
No, I just wondered because it's so much when we look at like uncanny valley effect in people, right? This is like such a huge research area of what do we find attractive about people and certain features and certain things.
Well,
I just
it's
wondered
definitely
if
a sexual characteristic, right? If we look at people as sexual characteristics and size, I think we can make some nice predictions there. Would be really cool to have enlarge
especially
the
with like
flanges
AI
and see
photos and things and what they look at. You could just keep enlarging it.
I think we
into
can
certain
do
things.
it very easily. It would be really interesting. I'm in for it, yeah.
Do you have already successful matches?
With the orangutans or with people? No, with the orangutans.
How much people enough?
With people?
Yeah.
Yes.
But especially the orangutans?
Oh, with the orangutans, no, not yet, because we have not. So for that, we would need to have really a bunch of females that are actually going to be allocated to a different zoo. Right, so we need to cooperate with a lot of different zoos. Right now, I'm collaborating with 2 zoos, Apenhul and IMZRCB. So that's not enough. So we need to collaborate with more zoos in order to be able to do that and compare the females that we placed in a specific zoo on the basis of the outcomes of the experiment with a group of females that we placed randomly or on the basis of genetic matches or something, but we haven't done that. I would love to do that. Yeah.
Are there any questions from online? Okay, so with that, I thank you so much, Mariska.
Thank you.
And beautiful. Okay, so we move on to our next presentation by Dr. Ilyena Hirskyj-Douglas. She is a lecturer, assistant professor at the University of Glasgow. Over the last decade, her research has examined how animals can control computer systems in homes and zoos to modify their environment, and what insights we can learn from these endeavors. With a priority on animal well-being and agency, Ilyena has built and studied how various animals use audio, video, smell, heating, and video call systems in an ethically focused manner. She is a pioneer in her field, as her work has unprecedentedly opened new possibilities for animals to connect and communicate with humans and other animals. So I'm guessing I skipped the time because you were supposed to go at 10, but I think it's okay. Hopefully John Coe can understand. My apologies for that, but we will have Ilyena run through her presentation, if that's all right, and then John Coe will do his presentation. Yes?
Is this just how I move it forward and backwards?
Yes.
This way's forward?
Yes, and then backwards.
Okay, excellent. Hi, everyone. I'm going to give like a quick talk here, and it's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour between the different stuff that I do, because it's sort of expanded into the crazy zone. But this talk that I'm going to give today is about my work that I want to do on towards making policy and guidelines for making technologies with animals in zoos. So animals using technology, including people, it's been a long time. It's nothing really new, even though nowadays a lot of people ask me about dogs using buttons and things like this. Animals have been using technology for extremely a long amount of time. If we go all the way back into, Skinner and Project Pigeon, where pigeons were used to guide missiles back in the 1940s. Originally, a lot of animals using technologies was for defense reasons. This then sort of moved, and we went more into tracking. So we can use technologies to track animals. Here we have VHF tracking. And then in the sort of 1980s, this massively moved into communication. So here we have Coco using, I think it was the Apple Mac II they developed. So it's a communication board. We have the dolphin keyboard here. Diana Reese pioneered a lot of this work into dolphins being able to use the keyboards underwater to communicate with humans. I would say nowadays technology has sort of still in these three very much areas. We've just sort of advanced how it looks a lot of the time. So here we have a dog using AR glasses. This came out in 2020, so here the AR glasses help it orientate to where they want it to go. We're still using tracking. We still have a lot of GPS, VHF, this sorts of thing. We're getting more advanced. These are getting smaller on collars. My dog actually wears a tracking collar that monitors his walking movement. It's always telling him he's a little bit lazy, so I'm not sure how well this is for using. ZSL, so Zoo in London, and Google have paired together and now use tracking for just identifying animals from videos. And in your lovely talk before, you mentioned a lot about machine learning and animals in this. And of course, again, we use a lot of things for communication. So your talk touched upon this. Smithsonian Zoo, this is an example here with an orangutan using a touchscreen. So we're sort of in the same sort of area of animals still using technology, but the technology that we're developing is continually advancing for animals. It's also advancing, and we're using it more in zoos, also for zoo visitors. So these are some recent examples. So Melbourne Zoo has a paper out this year on using VR interfaces with people to help people sort of understand animals more in their enclosures. San Diego Zoo uses something called iBeacons, and iBeacons, they notify when an animal is close by in the enclosure or a talk is going on. Many zoos also use touchscreens. This example here is from Antwerp Zoo. And Google Earth even has got on board with this. And I don't know if any of you use Google Earth. Sometimes you can drop inside of zoos and view inside the enclosures. So I would say in technology in zoos is really going on both sides of the enclosure, really, both for the animals and also for the people involved. A big movement in technologies, however, is massively towards how can we make these technologies more usable for animals involved. I would say part of this, oh yeah, you're right, the images are like very, the image on the left here really shows it just going around in circles. Part of this movement is more towards involving animals in the technology that we develop, but also, as well as involving them in the whole creation process. So we no longer just make technology and put it in an enclosure and see what happens. Instead, throughout the design process, we involve animals and the humans involved and all various different stakeholders is what we call them. So with this movement in technology towards involving animals in the process and the humans, that you can see, you can imagine there's a lot of different moving parts involved in this. And a big question in this, so I've put like my papers on the bottom in case you want like more details, but I'm not going to go super far into a lot of this. A big movement in this is how do we measure effective enrichment with technology? I'd say this is like kind of the largest hurdle of, what is really good in this and what do we mean by good. And if we look at animals using technologies in zoos specifically, there's a huge range of different positive, negative, sometimes neutral reactions. So from the positive side, we can get like decrease in scratching behaviors, reduced frustration. Some people have found it provides togetherness, increased space usage, increased agency. A lot of people claim this. Some people have found no effect. The technology has not changed much of the behavior. Sometimes we get quite negative behavior, so certain animals will turn off the technology if given the option. Some will massively destroy. This one actually here's from Fiona French, and the elephant just pulled it completely off. Initial negative reactions, this is quite common. Increased aggression, the technology can get as well, and just general aversive effects. And so when you get this huge spectrum of different reactions from technology, this, I believe, is in part because there's not many people who create bespoke technology for animals or use a lot of publications on the guidelines of how they use technology for animals. But this is where I really believe we need to start concreting some ways of using technology in animals to help reduce some of these negative reactions. And so this is where sort of I'm just going to whistle-stop through everything on some of the technology I've developed and some of the lessons I've learned from it. So I'm originally not a creator of zoo technology, actually. I began by making technology for my dog, my black Labrador. And then I moved to Finland, and I was making AR tech for people to help them in conversations. And I approached Kokosari Zoo in Helsinki and asked them if they would be interested in me making technology for the animals there. And ended up working with, you can see it on the top right here, white-faced Saki monkeys. When making technology, typically for humans, what you do is you do a lot of prototyping, low-fidelity prototyping. So you can see this on the left here. This is like a tunnel shape and a dome shape. So we tested for the Sakis what sort of shape of technology it would look like. And we ended up building this sort of tunnel device, is what you see on the right here. The top actually is made from plastic and the bottom made from wood that played audio to the different Saki monkeys. So this is a Saki monkey using our audio tunnel. We installed this in the zoo. Saki monkeys typically very high up, so this was high up in their enclosure. This tunnel device is, you can only hear audio inside of it, and it recognized when the Saki monkey was inside and would play different audio. What we found was that the Saki monkeys significantly triggered traffic sound more than any other sound. So the sound would randomly play on daily cycles, and we used it for a long time. But however, the interactions are quite short, between 3 and 6 seconds. Maximum, you'd say about 15 minutes. You wouldn't get much longer interactions than this. They did use it together and these sorts of things. So this sort of made me begin to think, okay, like what else can I build for them? So then it's quite easy actually to modify the system into having a screen on the side. So I did exactly the same study where I put it again inside of their enclosure, but this time with different videos. How I picked the different videos was similar to how I picked the audio. I tried to go for different types of audio, not human-like types of audio, but different types of in the sound spectrum. And same with the video. We went for different videos with different colors, different movements, and things like this. This is a Saki monkey watching a worm video. They significantly liked is a controversial one, they significantly triggered worm videos and underwater videos of jellyfish more than any other video. If comparing this to my previous music studies, they listened to the audio one a lot longer than the video version. And in this study, we also went into the behavior side, and we found that the video significantly reduced the scratching behaviors. But we did notice a lot of different behaviors. You see just some on the side here, but we went further into it. And so from this, how this system worked was it just detected the monkey whenever it went inside. And I thought, I've got to give the Saki monkeys more agency and more choice over the technology. And with humans, we use a lot of buttons, and also with screens, we use a lot of buttons. And I thought that if I threw out the idea of what a button is for a human, what does this look like for a monkey? So in the typical human style of prototyping, again, we did lots of low-fidelity prototyping, and these are just some of the prototypes we came up with. This is a video, so this is the Kokuzari Zoo and some of the buttons that we used. This is a push-style button, so this is very common. These are our Saki monkeys, very curious in our camera. This was a family group that had been together for quite a while. So this is the push-style button, and actually we built in a pressure sensor behind to see how hard they could push. Everything was with the mouth. So first of all, it's just have a bite, and then it's like, is there food behind in this Tupperware container? So the push button doesn't really work very well for Saki monkeys. So we thought maybe like a flick style button, because they enjoy grabbing onto things. Again, a flick style button was with the mouth. They were quite patient. They sort of take it in turns to have a try. And again, behind it, is there any food hidden anywhere? Anything more I can do with this? So then we tried pull interfaces. We actually tried originally a dog toy, you know, when you get the rope toy, but this was too heavy for them to lift, so we changed it to this ping pong ball and a string. And I think it's an interaction method, so to trigger something, this works quite well, but it does cause a little bit of frustration because they want to sort of pull this off, but it's on a string, so it comes back. You see they're sort of trying to grab it away. So then we came up with a swing toy, and this one was a lot of inspired by how they use their everyday behaviors in their zoo. They use actually a lot of dog toy enrichments, and we saw this, so we built this swing toy. We put a color behind. You can see increasingly they're getting a bit more colorful just to try and highlight that this moves. And this one was quite successful. So the Saki monkey spent actually a long time sitting there swinging it. So then we built it into our tunnel device. So then now they can pick exactly what audio and video to watch depending on what swing movement they used. This is an example of some of the video that was in there. So again, it's the same ones we had before. And we put it again quite high up in their enclosure. We didn't put it on their regular route, but high up enough that they could easily access it. And we put it in, and we put it in turned off initially just to see their normal everyday behaviors. And you can see one of the Saki monkeys is in here, swiveling the button around. And what we found was they didn't use the device at all. That was actually one of the very few videos of the Saki monkeys using it. So the lessons really were from this. We spent a lot of time and a lot of money building this device that didn't end up being used. But what we learned really was that white-faced Saki monkeys typically, I wouldn't say, use their hands to interact very much. If I was going to go back, I didn't think I would necessarily do the button stuff. But if you were going to do stuff that required hands of pulling things with this monkey, I think it's much better to do something that's pulling or twisting than it is to push, which is what we typically do as humans. So there's a lot of lessons learned in sort of how to make these. Moving on to another study, this is some more of my recent work done with Rebecca Kleinberger and Jennifer Kuna. And as I mentioned before, my real passion in technology and it began was with my dog. And me and my dog moved abroad at some point from the UK to Finland. And I thought my dog missed my dad's dog a lot. So I started to build video call technology for my dog, my dad's dog, and my dog and me, and think about what the animal internet would look like. I then learned a lot about parrots during this conference I was attending online, and learned that a lot of parrots live alone in the home. A lot of them have never seen another parrot before. Parrots have a lot of stereotypies. Parrots also have avian gangliosisis, which is, it's like HIV, similar to humans. It's a wasting disease. And it can be given by contact. So you can't just put parrots together and it will be okay. It's actually a very high rate of this disease, especially in the US. And so I started to think, how would I build parrot video callers? So two parrots in two separate locations could connect with each other. This study started, it was a really long process because no one had ever built parrot video callers before, and I'd done it with dogs, and obviously there's a lot of work with people. So we did a pilot study with 4 parrots for 2 months. Then we did a lot of surveys with parrot experts, such as Irene Pepperberg. And then we did a 3-month study with 18 parrots who you see here, where we gave them access to video calls. The process, it was kind of a really long, drawn-out process of training And then we did this, what I call meet and greet phase, which is where parrots met each other. So they trained how to use the screen, then they met each other, and then they had what we call open calling, where they could call for up to 3 hours a day, 3 times a week, and each call was limited to 5 minutes. So we put a lot of boundaries in place just to make sure their welfare was okay. So this is what the system looks like put together. So this is ringing the bell to signal that it wants the tablet. And then she gets up. The owner would then bring over the tablet. So you can't hear the audio, but we gave the humans a script to say, so she's just saying the script. She presents 2 profile photos that the parrot has already been introduced to. And then they select on the screen using their tongues. This is parrots in video calls. So these are 2 elderly. They hadn't seen another one of the species before. So the paper, and if you go on YouTube, there's also videos of this, if you want to know more details about how parrots use video call technology. But this whole process of trying to build the video caller, I learned extremely a lot of things. One of the things I originally wanted to do was I wanted the people to set up the caller and then completely walk away, so they wouldn't bias the video call. But what happened during our initial 4, we had those 4 people initially, was as soon as you would walk away, the parrot would get quite distressed, being like, what's going on? And shouting at the owner to come back, and totally threw them out of the study. So then we ended up having the owners there, saying a script, and things like this. We did a lot of training on the owners to recognize distress and things like this. But this is when I realized that we talk about it in terms of stakeholders in computer science, but the humans is so much of a stakeholder, even if you're making a system for an animal. It really drove this home. And so we also noticed that sometimes you can't just put a video screen in front of a parrot. Often it will do sort of distress behaviors. And so we came up with this whole method of, we started with the screen quite far away in the video call, the initial meet and greet, and then we would slowly walk towards. And if any distress behavior happened, we would immediately stop, and the sound would initially be off, and we'd slowly turn up the sound as well. And so this way, we facilitated this slow introduction, especially with parrots. You don't want to freak them out initially, because you can get then very bad association. So the lessons I learned here were really around people are essentially part of the technology that you develop. Slow introductions are always a good thing. I think you can never take it slow enough. And to also check for initial fear responses. You can't just presume that because it's just a video call of another parrot that it will be okay. This is some other work, and I forgot the reference at the bottom of the screen here. But actually, when I started to work in zoos, I did a lot of work around what do people want in zoo technology. I did it with zookeepers, and I also did it with zoo visitors. And it's worth noticing when I say people, it really depends on what role the person has as well to what they want. So you see there's general things that people want. They want something enrichment. They want something that improves their health. But then when you get down into the nitty-gritty of what they really want, zoo visitors want to learn something about the animal. They want sometimes direct contact with the animal through technology, while zookeepers just want more practical things. They want to make sure it's not breakable. They don't want it addictive. They don't want it too easy. And so when I talk about involving people as stakeholders, this doesn't necessarily mean they have the same goals in this. So moving on to some more zoo-related things. So about 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, I moved to Scotland, and I started working with Blair Drummond Safari Park. I started working with various different sorts of animals there, but mostly, initially, it was a lot with chimpanzees. I also worked with lemurs and giraffes, but chimpanzees came up initially. And I thought I had so much at this point already research done with white-faced Saki monkeys on audio that I could just build the same for chimpanzee, no problem. Totally mistakes. So we built this system. You can see it on the right here. It was outside their enclosure. And again, what this uses is it detects when they're in front of the system and plays them different audio. And you can see, maybe the table's a little bit small, but we installed the system initially with nothing, and then we turned it on. And it wasn't until day 25 that they even went near the system. It was an extremely long period, which is Very different than if you have a Saki monkey who's initially very curious about everything. I would say it's also different than lemurs. Lemurs are very highly curious about anything you bring in. Giraffes, initially a little bit, skittish around things, but not up to the 25-day mark, I would say a couple of days. So it taught me a big lesson here on that I need to leave stuff in for a long time before they even use things. I was also a little bit skeptical here on whether this idea of being in front, they understood this triggering mechanism. And so then I built another device for the chimps over here. And this device was a heating device. So in Scotland, it can get quite cold outside for the chimps. And so we built it so that the chimps, it would blast them with heat, a gentle blast with heat. In this device, what I did instead was we built it with a projector screen, and the projector screen would project a square of light. This was us prototyping videos, actually. You can see here, a projector screen of light that would change color and then blast heat at them. And see, it's using it with the mouth open here. I think it's another video here. Yeah, this was during our prototype phase. These videos were taken. And I thought this would be a little bit more understandable, standing on light and light changing. But again, they didn't use the system. Actually, it was when we looked at the videos, it was more the keepers in the winter using the system to get warm. So I thought, oh, okay, maybe the light wasn't so good. And initially, when we brought the projector in as well, the chimps were really unhappy with just the projector being there. And I ended up speaking to Yoko in Tokyo about this, because she does so much work with chimps and projectors. And she said just to leave the projector on. This killed my projector. Anyone knows you shouldn't leave a projector on for many, many days. It just overheats. So we went through a couple of projectors in this study. But so even then I learned that it's not only leaving the device on, but also leaving the device itself in just to get used to it. We've done a lot more work recently around, again, because of my work previously with video. We've done a lot of work with video. Similar to your work, my zoo is very much interested in video callers, and with all my parrot stuff and dog stuff and video callers for chimpanzees. Again, we left the device in, so this is just a screen turned off. This is chimpanzee and Blade Drum Zoo, so they're very interested in, well, as soon as you put anything in, just sitting by and having a very good look at it. And we went back actually to working with when they stand close by. Even though we left this screen device in for a long time, as soon as we turned the screen device on, and at this point what we were doing was we were playing videos of themselves back to them to try and ease them into the system rather than just directly connecting them live, we still got initial different sort of reactions. So you can see very shocked it's just turned on. Very curious. And then sort of more a bit relaxed. But this was his actually initial reaction. Straight away, as soon as it turned on. So again, I think this requires, with videos of themselves, in the moment we're showing them videos of themselves and videos of unknown others, it requires such a long period of leaving systems in. This can't be just a quickly 1 day, 2 day, 3 day study. This is another video from it. So shocked it's come on. Sitting there eating. They eat a lot in front of the screen. It's a little bit like Netflix and chill. But anyway, so with this work is still ongoing at the moment. I'm not published about any of this stuff, but what I've learned really from chimpanzees is it's very hard to make an interface that's controllable. And what does it mean for an animal to have control over the interface? It's such a complex question. How do we understand that it's interactive? And again, this idea that we have to use it for a long time. Zookeepers play such a huge part here. Are very lucky to work with Blade Runner Zoo, which is so positive about the technology, and I think this massively impacts a lot of things. I think there's a big difference in chimps between inside and outside the enclosure. So the light projected inside, I think, was a little bit more induced fear reactions than anything outside. And so there's all these sort of lessons learned. And so then I start to wonder, is there really a need for guidelines here on how we use technology? Because so much of what I'm talking about is me just stumbling along and learning as we go. I believe that if we have guidelines from people who are using technology in zoos, this could help reduce some of these initial negative reactions. This will reduce the need for a lot of testing on animals. and refine our process, which essentially hits on the 3 Rs. And it will make systems, I believe, more usable in the long term, which is what I'm always aiming for. How do we use systems long term, not just quick interventions? And so when I think about what guidelines I would recommend, I think a lot of technology should automatically allow for this autonomy and agency. If you look at all the technology I used, all the animals had control over using it or not using it. It didn't take up their whole enclosure. We always used it in one space. I think there also needs to be a lot of the, if you look at my studies, I also look at how animals use the space after it was removed. Because this is essentially their home. It's not okay to put something in. Maybe it causes initial reaction, and it can really affect how they use the space. I think we should always have this slow introductions, as I mentioned with parrots and with chimps, regardless of the species. And I think there's a lot of safety standards. So because I build all this stuff myself, if you're ever wanting to put stuff in zoos, I have a lot on materials and different sorts of technology. And then I think before we just put technologies into zoos, we should really think about what we're doing it for. So how does this help promote an animal's inherent welfare? And so in summary, animals have been using technology for a long time. Technology can cause positive and negative effects and all along the spectrum. Done lots of learning from building different technologies for different animals over the past 10 years. And I think if we pull this learning together from me and other people, that we can really help form into different sorts of guidelines. So thank you for listening to my talk, and I would like to invite any questions.
So we have time for 1 to 2 short questions. So if anyone has any questions, or if we have questions from online. Okay, so I guess I'll ask one question. How movable or adaptable is your new technology to another zoo if, say, for example, we wanted to try something at the Serengeti Park?
So all of my technology is available on GitHub online. A lot of it is movable just because in the nature of where we put it in there, but it does require, it's not commercially available, so it does require a little bit of people work to up and running. A lot of the systems that I develop are IoT, totally anonymous. So you just put them in and we can remotely monitor them, and this is because I want to try and disturb the animals less. So there is possibility to do that as well remotely. You don't need necessarily the people there. But a lot of you saw the technology developed because it's built by me. It does require a little bit of maintenance at this stage. So yeah, thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Ilyena, and beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. One last question.
Did you thought about to make also the audio playbacks maybe adapted to the animals? So I know that Jack Snowden created music specially for cats. And we discussed yesterday that there's this group which make music special for pigs and tested that certain components like frequency and rhythm are associated to positive welfare.
Yeah, I've not looked at making like bespoke audio. You're right. There's ones for macaques and called macaque calls and things like this. But I've not looked at making bespoke audio. Instead, I looked at just different sorts of audio in the audio spectrum. I don't know, I'm very much interested, and some of my work that's coming out soon will be a lot around how you make these systems personal for the individual animal with the group as well. So I think bespoke audio also plays into this, what does an individual want as well as what does a group want, because these individuals do live in groups, so it's a kind of a tension here on how we make technology that fits in with both of these, but I've not looked at making bespoke audio. And this in part is because, what does it mean to like an audio is another huge question of, they listen to it more, but, we as humans, we watch horrible videos. We listen to horrible things. We sit on Instagram. I'm guilty of a long time. And so I'm not sure that I can go so far into creating things that they like when I'm so not sure on a definition of likability or preference.
Thank you very much. And this is a present for you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Okay. So once again, I apologize for the mix-up in the schedule. Now we continue on with John Coe. He is a landscape architect, environmental planner, and zoo designer with over 60 years of study and professional experience. He also, that also includes 160 planning and design projects for zoos, botanic gardens, animal sanctuaries, and nature parks in 15 countries on 6 continents. So he really goes by the numbers. He has published over 70 scholarly papers, book chapters, and conference papers, as well as lectured in 20 countries. So we welcome John Coe from Online. Hello, John, whenever you're ready.
Hello. Okay. Okay, now where will I see the, you will present the PowerPoint on, I'll see the screen and then we can work.
Do you see the screen now?
No.
One moment, one moment.
There we go.
All right.
Okay. Well, first of all, apologies to everyone. My gray beard may give away my technical skills. We've just heard 2 lovely scientific papers, and so I want to emphasize right now that I'll be speaking very unscientifically from a designer's point of view. I've been doing this work for a long time, as I mentioned, and I've also done quite a bit of publishing, as I mentioned. So I try to keep up on the science literature. Of course, as most of you probably scientists know, that's an impossible thing, but nevertheless, certainly as I work on papers and things, there are a lot of references to keep up with and such. So, but I know that some of my colleagues, professional design colleagues, don't seem as interested in the science. And so I did an extremely informal survey. So again, totally non-science. I checked with esteemed zoo design colleagues, well-recognized people in the profession, 2 in the US, 2 in Europe, and 2 in Asia, and asked them, how involved they are with the scientific literature. How carefully do they keep up with the new science? And he said, well, almost not at all. And so right away, well, why is that? And so my interviews with them and my own experience led me to put together this presentation about improving zoo design with better science integration, a designer's perspective. So why don't we use more science to inform design? Next, please. Okay, so who is a zoo designer? I mean, that's a big question because there's so many people involved. So it could be anyone with influence on the project. Next. Zoo directors, often take credit for good projects, and indeed they should. They put the whole thing together. They got the team working together. They raised the money. They can certainly be considered exhibit designers. Next. Veterinarians often become curators and directors and are very influenced in the design. Next. Then there are professional exhibit designers. Usually they work for museums and trade shows and things like that. Occasionally they do zoo design work. Next. Then some major zoos have really excellent exhibit departments that work with all their staff to develop their designs. Next. And there are design build contractors in major cities around the world. They do often do trade shows and things like that. They do theme parks and sometimes they do zoos. So they do the design and the construction. Next. And then throughout the world, most exhibits in zoos are designed by a local architect with no zoo experience. So the local zoo brings in a local architect. They may be very good, but they probably don't know very much about zoos. And so the The zoo then has to provide them with all the information they need to for this unique kind of work. Next. Then there are people that I think nowadays are called zoo architects, but they're people like myself and my colleagues that are specialists in zoo design, and some are architects. Most of us are actually landscape architects. And this is more common in the developed world. It's been going on for, I don't know, 50 years in North America. It's gaining a lot of strength in Europe, and there are now a few firms in Asia as well that have been doing it quite a long time. Next. But what's really important is the interdisciplinary team, you know, bringing the right professionals together with the staff. And what's really essential is that your design professionals work with you, not for you. You know, you call the shots, it's your project. We're there to help you see your dreams fulfilled. Next. So I'd like to begin with a few definitions based on what my colleagues told me and what I've seen myself about the use of science in zoo design. So first of all, there's no science. So a lot of zoo exhibits I've seen are based on design operation on tradition and intuition, or just copies of copies. You know, we visited this other zoo that really, we like that, we're going to do one of those. And so you don't need science if you're just copying something somebody else has done. Next. Then there's what I call good old science, 50-year-old biology and wild habitat science. And of course, you know, go ahead next. You know, we talk about Hagenbeck and his influence so long ago, Lorenz, Heidegger, and so forth. And pretty soon you're getting into zoo biology, into ethology. Keep going. And then what I call new science. And so back in the old science, I certainly want to, you know, mention Diane Fossey, Jane Goodall, Birgit Galikas, George Schaller, Alan Rabinowitz, and those people who did such amazing field work that stands very well today. But new science is, in my loose definition, anything that's more up to date. Go ahead. And then there's something I call science after, which is new science or good science, but it's done after the project's built. And so it helps inform the next generation of projects, but doesn't do any good to the last project, the one that was studied after it was done. Next. And then I talk about science during, and that's what I'd really like to suggest, is iterative, cyclic, empirical evaluations before, during, and after design and after operation. And some things you've just been hearing about from Ilyena are, you know, very much science during, prototyping things. And that's a direction we need to move more, even on larger projects. Next. So testing early prototypes. Next. And then Eduardo Fernandez has come up with an idea he calls TED, which is temporary exhibit design. So it's the same sort of mock-ups you saw in the last excellent presentation, but to, you know, to much larger scale. You certainly can't mock up the whole exhibit, but, you know, how many things can you test early on before you're building the final construction? Next. So what's the problem? The problem I see is that planning, design, and operation is not sufficiently based on the newer design throughout the industry. Now, there are certainly highlights, you know, that you've just seen, and places like Zoo Atlanta have been on top of this for a long time, and other zoos. But throughout the industry, we don't see much sign of it. Next. So we have the field of zoo biology, and you know, Terry Maple was the first editor of the journal, and so now this is a very big thing, a very important document, and it talks about animal welfare, training and behavior, operations, visitor-animal interactions. Go ahead. But there's also a whole another realm of visitor studies. And I was very interested to see the presentations this morning that were beginning to compare how humans interact and how apes, for example, interact. But so visitor studies, go on. Field ecology, wildlife ecology. There's amazing work going on, particularly with new technology that's available, and also in the breed and release field and the rewilding field. A lot of good work going on. Next. And then in conservation, both in situ, ex situ, but also through education, how do we motivate people to practice conservation through our exhibits? And so the main thing I'm trying to say here is, as a designer, we need information in all these fields. And as I'll show you, often it's too compartmentalized. Next. And then what about strategic planning? How about sustainable design and the circular economy? Next. Climate mitigation and adaptation. All these things are part of zoo design. And so finding science in all of these, but also ways to relate the science in all these different ones. Next, please. Go ahead. So the question is, you know, why don't designers use more science? You know, I certainly try to, but my colleagues, you know, really said they weren't. Now, maybe there are many other zoo designers that weren't part of my very small survey. But, you know, the reasons given by my colleagues is, you know, they're trained as architects, landscape architects, such, but they're not behaviorists or zoologists. And they expect that to be provided by someone else. And so it depends on the quality of the information provided to them by the zoo. Next. Okay, that works really well, showing the whole line there. So it's not prioritized by clients. Many clients just want to copy other zoos with small modifications. As far as I've seen, you know, scientific backup isn't required in official zoo standards. Often clients say the studies are too expensive, they're not in the budget, or they take too long and they cause delays. So, you know, we're not interested. Next, please. Some zoo directors and managers resist innovation. They're traditionalists, they don't like change. They may use the old science that they learned in their youth, but not now, and they just copy other models and often repeat other problems, or certainly don't advance the field. Next. Often people can't visualize things, and if they can't visualize design concepts, they can't probably visualize the need for science. And then fear of failure, risk aversion is very common throughout humans and other animals. One very important zoo manager told me, I don't like change. Change just causes problems. And another told me, I wouldn't want to have anything to do with it if it didn't work. And so these are, you know, these are risk aversions that we all have to deal with. Next. And then research findings are too limited in our work. There are just too few studies done. Most zoo design projects around the world have never been evaluated. Of more than 100 zoo exhibits I've designed, I've actually had 7 evaluations published, and they were only partial. You know, they evaluated what the animals did, but they didn't evaluate what the people did or what the care staff did. And then none of the 6 designers that I talked to had any projects reviewed scientifically at all. Next. And then a real problem I have is that in the papers I read, papers, for example, evaluating public response to different kinds of enrichment features and papers like that. They use certain terms like naturalistic or functional or traditional without any detail. There are nuances all through here. For example, one reptile enclosure expert I've talked to identifies 5 types of enclosure design between nature and laboratory. But in the literature, they're just all naturalistic or all traditional or all, there's no distinction made. So how do I know what the value of what they're designing has to do with the style of the design? And then when we started working with habitat immersion, landscape immersion in mid-1970s, we had very specific definitions of what that meant and how to meet it. But today, just the word immersion is just, it's a marketing term. Everybody says, oh, we're immersive. There's no rigor to the definition of immersion anymore. And so I think we need a mutually agreed upon glossary of definitions between scientists, designers, caretakers, educators, psychologists, all the people that work in this field, so we can be more rigorous about the terms we use. Next, please. And then, there are professional standards that we have to work within, and sometimes they're government standards, and sometimes they're managed by the societies. But they're pretty hard to change, and a lot of them are based on older science, and the standards are designed to eliminate the worst, but they also eliminate the best. If it doesn't fit the existing paradigm, it's very hard to get approved. And sometimes the standards are written by influential leaders who don't want to make their own facilities obsolete, so they take kind of a neutral stance. They're difficult to update, and then designers know if they just meet the standards, even though those are minimum, they'll gain quick approval and the project goes ahead. Next. And then I have a thing about best practice. To me, best practice is a 10 or 20-year-old radical idea, which the zoo industry has finally caught up with. And so when I hear clients say, we aspire to best practice, I think, boy, that's a low hurdle. We should all aspire to advancing best practice, to the next generation of best practice. Next, please. And then also, when I do read studies done of designs, they're usually focused on problems. What didn't work. Well, that's good. We learn most by making mistakes. But why aren't award-winning projects studied? And then why aren't some of the fundamental theories behind design styles like landscape immersion, affiliative design, activity-based design and management, animal rotation? These are being used in exhibits all over the world. Some are considered best practice, but I've never seen a study validating any of these. And they're kind of bedrock elements in the designer's toolkit. Next. And some clients just want to celebrate success. They want to move on. They like what they got, and they don't need a scientist to tell them it works or doesn't work. They want to move on to the next project. Next. And then this is what I was talking about before. There are all these types of specialties, and you can read a really good study about what the primates did under certain circumstances or how they used a certain enrichment, but nobody tells you what the visitors were doing at the same time they were observing this enrichment. Or you get people looking at visitor studies, but they're not telling you exactly what the animal's doing, except it's active. Visitors like it active. Well, could you tell me more, please? And so all this information is too siloed to be cross-referenced for those of us who need it. Next. So that's what we need, integrated studies. Now, one exception is a new field of animal visitor interactive studies. Most of it focuses on problems caused by people to animals, but we need more studies on creative, positive interactions. And some of this work is being done, as Ilyena knows, by the animal visitor interaction studies, but also the animal computer studies. There's a group looking at it there. Next, please. And then post-occupancy evaluations are valuable, but they're actually very rare. And even more rarely are they published. And then when they are published, again, they look at one area. You know, I was honored to design many of the great ape exhibits at Zoo Atlanta, and I saw a very good post-occupancy evaluation on how the gorillas used to exhibit, but it said nothing about the visitors. Nothing about the caregivers, and then another post-occupancy there about the pathway system, but it said nothing about what the animals were doing. So, and then even though I'm happy to have received a couple of them, designers are almost never sent the post-occupancy evaluations. We've already moved on to other projects. We're out of the loop, and so they don't benefit us. Next. So here's some solutions that I would recommend. Revise a project management process to embed research science into the design team. You know, to study the animals in the setting and the team before, during, and after. And then learn by doing. Certainly the prototyping that Ilyena just showed us is a wonderful example of that, but can we expand it to other elements of the exhibit? Now, most of the work being done in enrichment, of course, is trying to fix up old exhibits. We don't get many opportunities to start from scratch on whole new exhibits, but how can we use that same process in new exhibits? And then a very important thing is a commissioning stage. If you're building a ship, the ship is built, but it's not finished. The ship goes out to sea. It goes through rigorous testing, comes back to port. Then they have a budget called a commissioning budget to repair the things they found that they needed during the rough sea trials. Zoo design, zoo exhibits need exactly the same kind of commissioning stage. We need a commissioning budget built into the project budget that's not spent until the exhibit is occupied. And then we've learned, you know, additional things as the animals make use of their agency to redesign our exhibit for us, which is, of course, what we want. Okay. Also, there are problems with doing this kind of design in terms of it increases the cost of the design, but it also increases the long-term success. And what I really want to emphasize is that in many projects in a life cycle setting, the design is only a few percent of the overall life cycle cost. Construction is, you know, 10 or 20% of life cycle cost. But if this project is active for, 30 years, you're going to save money by spending more money on this kind of research and commissioning. And then the result is you got more new science to improve the base of the profession. Next. Standardized definitions. Next. Nature is the norm. We need to study more nature, less other zoos. Don't copy other zoos. Look deeply into nature. Jake Vesey and his Care for the Rare is getting standards together for animal design based on natural models. We also need to focus on sustainable design and management of native species. The long-term cost of keeping tropical animals in the north or northern animals in the south is just not going to be sustainable. And we also want to, emphasize species from similar bioclimates so they can spend more time outdoors in much bigger areas. Next. And more flexible regulatory standards. So if we can connect the government standards to the new information in the species survival plans and the Exeter programs and other taxon advisory group information, we can update the science and update the standards much more quickly. Next. okay, we want to aspire to constant improvement. We want to plan for future change with flexible design. If today we know 20 times more about the needs of zoos and zoo animals and zoo stakeholders, if today we know 20 times more than we did 20 years ago, 20 years from now, we'll know, 100 times more. And we have to design permanent structures today to adapt to that change. We need to aspire that we will learn better and can do better, and we need to be able to change things as we go. So we need to exceed standards, aspire to the next generation of best practice with scientific support. Next. And we need to raise our own standards and justify our programs based on newer scientific knowledge. More and more we need the backup. How can we, what's our credibility in the zoo industry and beyond? Your credibility with the community, and also reducing future renovation and repair costs, your credibility for sustainability. These are critical things that we can get with science better influencing design. Next.
Thank you.
We are. Thank you, and apologies again for the delay.
Hi, John. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I think we have time for only one question, unfortunately, because we're running. Okay, Ilyena has a question for you. One moment.
Hi, John. Thank you so much. It's a lovely talk. I had a question around, you mentioned a lot of this iteration process, and I know that a lot of the iteration process is around making small changes continually. Have you ever encountered a situation where the two stakeholders, so for instance, it could be a zookeeper and maybe the animal using it, are very different in what they would want in technology, and how do you manage these conflicts? Or I mean, non-technology and zoo design even, in how to do this?
Thank you for the question, and it's good to see you again. We were privileged to have Ilyena visit us last summer and share some of her amazing work. We try to work out a strategy that covers all stakeholders. And one project I did with the Melbourne Zoo, we got in the workshop with all the stakeholders present, and we defined a bill of rights for all stakeholders. So if you're in an area involved by this project, what are your rights? So if you're an animal there, what are your rights? If you're a plant in that exhibit, what are your rights? If you're a free-ranging bird that lives in the area, what are your rights? And of course, if you're one of the caregivers, the staff, the veterinary staff, or, what are the rights of the organization to make a profit? And so we defined all of these, cross-referenced them, and we found out that certain things came all the way through, like all the stakeholders have the right to be respected. All the stakeholders have the right to all their basic needs and to agency to act on those needs. The tree in the exhibit has rights too. All of these have it. And so what we found is we found 5 of these basic rights, and I could send a paper to anybody who wants to see that. And we all signed a charter that as the exhibits evolve and all the prototypes and tests evolve, that we can't overstep the rights of any of the stakeholders. And so in that way, if the care staff said, I don't want to do it that way, and somebody else said, well, we should do it that way, we had to negotiate, the way forward that benefited everybody most. So it was all based on reciprocity. So good design is reciprocal design. Hopefully nobody loses and everybody wins, and that's the direction you want to go. So I'm not sure how close that came to answering your question, but that's my direction.
Okay, thank you so very much for joining us from Australia, John. We wish you a great day, and perhaps you stick on to watch the other presentations. But thanks so much for joining us.
Great, thank you all.
Okay, so we move on to the next presentation by Dr. Paul Rose. He's a lecturer in animal behavior at the University of Exeter. His subject specialisms are applied animal behavior and welfare and collecting evidence for animal husbandry. He is a member of the UK government's Zoo Expert Committee, and through his involvement with several BIAZA, EAZA, and AZA committees and working groups, he is well placed to present on his topic, the importance of animal welfare inputs as the foundation of positive animal welfare outputs. So please help me to welcome Dr. Paul Rose.
Okay, thanks, folks. Please excuse my rather grand title. This is a very back-to-basics talk, which is inspired by a lot of the policy that is going through in BIAZA and EAZA collections at the moment, particularly around accreditation and managing animal welfare standards. And what practically do we need to do to make sure that we are meeting the requirements of the bodies that regulate and provide membership ideals and goals for zoos. So I'm sure that many of you are aware, and I don't want to teach anybody in the room to suck eggs because you're all more expertise on this than I am, that policy in zoos is moving forwards. The general public is less forgiving over animal welfare, and it's more aware of animal welfare standards. And the zoo industry is catching up with this. And if we look at what's going on in the BIAZA region at the moment, where BIAZA is becoming an accredited organisation, and we are currently writing policies that will be the judgment basis for zoos in terms of how they meet those membership goals, we need to be thinking about rapid, valid, and repeatable welfare assessments for all of the species that we house. I'm very old school in my understanding of animal welfare, and I always go back to Donald Broome and his definition of welfare from 1986, which is the animal's welfare state is how it's attempting to cope with its environment. Because to me, that makes perfect sense. Welfare has these behavioral components, it has these physiological components, and it has these psychological components that all make up what an individual is doing, acting, behaving, and expressing at a particular time. And I think Javier's workshop yesterday really beautifully summarized all of the complexities around 5 very familiar species in terms of what we as individuals perceive to be indicators of welfare. So that's all very well and good for big enigmatic mammals, which we like to focus on. We look across the zoo research. There's been very many studies done that show there's a mammal bias in what we like to investigate. But mammals are not necessarily the most speciose of taxa kept in zoos. Birds and fish outrank them by the number of exhibits and number of individuals in those exhibits. And if we think about welfare assessment for groups of fish, and I'm showing you a very flippant example here of a shoal of rosy barbs, you might be able to pick out one individual in this shoal that's coping less well with its current environment than others. There's one fish in the middle that's really poorly orientating itself. But if we look collectively across this group of animals, and we do a welfare assessment that is looking at the group-based level, we might suggest, well, actually, everybody's sort of fine, so maybe that one doesn't actually matter. And this individual idea of welfare assessment for species that are more complex, are more challenging to us as the people trying to infer their welfare state, really means that we need to think about what is important for those individuals at that time, and that is the basis of how we generate welfare assessment. And this is a real conundrum, right, with what we have to do in the zoo, because we've got to provide appropriate care. We've got to make sure that on balance, animals experience positive states. We have to intervene when animals are sick, injured, or distressed. We provide veterinary care. We have to make sure that we give individual wants and needs to those animals that we are looking after. What would they like to do? What's in their best interests to do? What do we hope they can do when they're on exhibit? And again, as Javier said yesterday, this idea of control and choice and giving autonomy over the animals in our care provides for positive welfare outcomes. At the same time as that, we've got to conserve adaptive traits. We've got to build resilience in our populations. If they are ever going to produce individuals that go back to the wild, we don't want to send back a plastic zoo version of that animal. So that resilience is inherent in the population. We've got to make sure that there's opportunities that animals experience in management, husbandry, enrichment, enclosure design, whatever, that enables them to get fitness benefits from the adaptations they possess. And we've got to make sure that when we manage larger populations, that's done in an ecologically relevant manner. Not all social groups are friendly all of the time. Animals experience stresses from conspecifics. There's hierarchy, there's limited access to resources. There's all of these things that will impact on individual welfare states. So perhaps we need to think about general principles. Perhaps we need to think about what makes those principles relevant and ensure that any welfare templates that we manage or make allows us to look at what's going in to that exhibit and that enclosure, that allows us to infer the idea that individuals are likely to experience positive outputs because the support, the grounding for their welfare state is going to be relevant to them from a biological point of view. So what I mean by that with my Rosie Barb example is, do we have to think about the emotional state of all individuals in the population if it's not meaningful at that particular time, because we simply can't do it? The idea of trying to work out whether or not these fish are happy, sad, or ambivalent is going to take up a large part of your day. So do we go back to basis and think about the things that we can provide well and the things that we are under control of that would ultimately allow the fish to succeed? Do we provide opportunities for emotional states to be positive? And therefore, if the animal is potentially aware of its surroundings and aware of different stimuli that it would respond to, is it more likely to be, on balance, getting positive benefits from its environment? And therefore, we should assess the individual's abilities to successfully engage with these inputs. Are they accessible to the individuals that we're looking after? And therefore, everybody in that social group has a way of interacting with them, so long as that's ecologically relevant. So it's these general principles, this evidence-based approach that we've talked about so much in this conference that is key. Some of you might have heard of qualitative behavioural assessment developed by Françoise Wemmelsfelder at Scotland's Agricultural College. This has been used quite widely in the agricultural sector in terms of looking at cattle and donkeys and horses and sheep and goats and pigs and chickens. It's now also been developed for fish as well. 2 papers came out on qualitative behavioural assessment for salmon last year. But I think we can go a step forward and we can look at these ideas of what is an animal expressing to us in terms of how it's responding to its inputs and do some very quick, rapid keeper assessments. So these are some golden eyes, a common species of diving duck we find in captive collections at the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, at Slimbridge, where I spend part of my work. And we could look at seasonality, we could look at environmental conditions, we could look at the social group that is there, we could look at the behaviours those individuals are responding, as well as the behavioural expression which is also being responded to by others. And we can determine that if over time we build up this bank of knowledge of how individuals express themselves according to the inputs they get, we have this quick-fire, rapid way of assessing welfare. Because to me, that's what's really important. It's keepers that are doing this, and keepers are busy. So any form of welfare assessment that we do needs to be something that keepers can get on board with, record, repeat, and then evaluate with other stakeholders on the section to work out whether or not inputs need to change. So I know we're going to be hearing about the kind of Maslow's tree hierarchy of needs, the kind of tree that is in the WASA standards for animal welfare in a few other talks today. But I thought I would just put this in there because I've just picked out a few key points from this hierarchy of needs. So physiological needs, which form the basis the kind of foundation of getting to a good welfare state. This needs to be continually researched. I think, as John said in his previous talk, we don't just have best practice and stop. We keep advancing best practice to make sure that we are constantly keeping up with how science changes. We advance the implementation of healthcare and other protocols, so that allows us to work out what do animals need at a particular time, according to life stage, according to physiological changes, according to their role in that population. Again, beautifully illustrated yesterday by Javier's example of looking at geriatric individuals in welfare assessment. And then when we get right to the top, this idea that mental stimulation and this idea of choice over relationships or choice over what I do in my enclosure develops these positive moods and positive emotions, we need to develop more ways of qualifying that for non-mammals. We're doing a lot of work in mammalian taxa. That's been highlighted by lots of the talks that we've seen about enrichment and technology. But it's not just mammals that can suffer poor welfare. We need to branch out and think about what do we know about mammals to apply to the other taxa that we're also working with. So to kind of wrap this up and bring this all together, I think it's really important that we go back to what is the ecological relevance of that species in that population, and what is it designed, evolved, adapted to do. So here are two clownfish engaging with a sea anemone. How are they orienting themselves? How are they expressing behaviours indicative of comfort, of engagement, of relaxation, of restlessness? And how does that allow us to work out, across all of the clownfish that we see in captivity, a set of welfare metrics that we could look across aquaria and say, these ones are generally fine, but maybe this one over here needs a bit more attention. And then likewise, when we think about potentials for expressions of behaviours that are indicators of poorer welfare or not doing so well in the environment, and maybe we can't always provide a clownfish with an anemone, how does that allow us to give an evidence base to say to zoos, this is precisely the setup that is needed for that species? So I hope this kind of talk has showed you that we need to build resilience in our populations because wild animals face multiple challenges. We know they have competition. We know they have aversive situations. And we know that we've got to try and include some form of unpredictability into husbandry if we enable species to develop a full and positive behavioural repertoire. And I think that's really key to collection planning. Consider the role of that species in the zoo. If it's going to live in the zoo for the whole of its life, maybe we can allow it to become a bit more humanised. But if it's going to go into a conservation programme in the future, it's going to be part of the one-plan approach. Do we need to make sure that all of these adaptive benefits are conserved? And this is listed in WASA's welfare strategy, retaining and encouraging natural abilities, providing elements of natural living, ensuring individuals can engage fully with ecologically relevant aspects of the environment, and providing husbandry in line with the role of that species in the zoo. We go back to basics. Why is it there? Why are we keeping it? Let's mould our husbandry accordingly. And that will enable us, I think, to answer some very challenging questions. Because if I was asked to judge the mood of this cleaner shrimp, well, I'm at a complete loss, right? Is it happy or sad? Is it excited? Is it invigorated? Is it fed up that I'm filming it? I don't know. But policy is moving in this direction where if we are using the 5 domains for welfare assessment and we're trying to infer the mental domain, these are the types of challenges that we've got to think about. So these are my general thoughts and ideas. I hope it's shown you that zoo animal welfare definitions and assessments need broader input of taxa's ecological and evolutionary past and history. I think we should develop behavioural inventories for particular species so that we know what positive affective states are. I think ethograms are remarkably important. What should we be promoting in the zoo and why? And if we put all of our efforts together to implement species-specific husbandry and we keep reviewing that husbandry, that's our best basis for getting animals to a position where they can experience positive outputs. We might necessarily know how to measure those outputs, but they get them there. So what is meaningful? What is necessary? Where does science take us in the future? So those are just my general thoughts and ideas. I think we should all keep talking on this topic because it's not going to go away. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. So does anyone have any questions for Paul at the moment? Okay, are there any questions for online? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Marina Scheumann. She's a senior researcher at the University of Zoology, or the Institute of Zoology at the University of Veterinary Medicine, Hanover. Her research focus is on comparative bioacoustics in mammals, and she investigates what information is encoded in communication for mammals, and she investigates what information is encoded in their vocalizations and how they use these to coordinate social interactions. Accordingly, she is interested in how the information on vocal communication can be used to improve animal management. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Marina Scheumann.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. I hope you are not too hungry. I try to make it still interesting. I already told you that I'm getting attached during my PhD to bioacoustics, and I try to explore to what extent we can use it, maybe also to improve animal management. The reason why I'm so... What I have to press? The reason why I think vocalization can be a good tool for animal management is because they contain a lot of informations. So when the vocalization contain informations about the animal's emotional state or the situation in which the animal is, whether it's a positive state or a negative state, we also have informations about the animal itself. So not only the species, it's also sex, age, body weight, dominant status, kinship, familiarity. All this can be encoded in vocalizations. Vocalizations encode also the health status. For example, when you have a respiratory disease, I mean, you think on coughing. This is something what you can monitor. And some species also modify their calls depending on the reproductive state. And we have now the possibility or the technology to use this, because we can do recordings 24 hours for 7 days per week, even in the ultrasonic range, which is really a challenge. And we have the revolution of artificial network, we have deep neural networks, and I'm able to train a detector network for mouse lemurs. So we have now a very good technological basis to develop automatic passive acoustic monitoring systems. And this is what the bioacoustic community tries to promote at the moment. It's not only the production side, we can also use vocalizations to alter behavior of the recipients. So for example, elephants are afraid of bees, therefore bee playbacks can be used to deter them from crops. You have pingers to deter seals and whales from fisher net, or maybe from the vegetables in your garden. You can also deter the rodents. We listen already that playbacks were used to count the megapods in one of the talks. We listen that audio playbacks can be used to enrich the environment of the animals. So also active manipulation is possible. I'm working with several animal species, but today I would like to talk about our projects on the southern white rhinoceros. I already told you that the project was initiated by Michael Böhr and originated here in the Serengeti-Park. The southern white rhinoceros are a good species for that. Often people ask me, why southern white rhinoceros? Other rhinos are more endangered, why you do not work with the others? The southern white rhinoceros has a big advantage. It's semi-social, so the males have their own territories, but the territories of the females overlap, or the home ranges of the females overlap with several territories, and you can observe the animals not only in the zoo, but also in the field in groups up to 10 individuals, which are temporarily stable. And especially when you investigate vocalizations, they are used to coordinate social interactions. It's good when you have animals who have social interactions. When we started the project, there was 2 vocal repertoires available, and I think the first important thing is to establish what a vocal repertoire is similar when you say a behavioral repertoire. It's also part of the behavioral repertoire. And when I compared the studies, so one study was by Owen Smith in 1973, and one study was by Polish later in 2008. The interesting fact was that the 2 repertoires agreed only in 5 call types. Interestingly, Owen Smith reported much more aggressive calls, and Polish reported much more calls related to foraging contexts. So the question is why we have the differences. There were several differences between the studies. So at first, one study was in the southern white rhinoceros, one study was in the last herd of the northern white rhinoceros, one study was in the field, one was in the zoo, and of course, the methodologies changed over the years, over 30 years, so therefore there are also some differences. So one point we try is to clarify the vocal repertoire. So where we do that, we work in different zoos. We worked in 11 different zoos. We started in Germany, and then we expanded to France and Denmark. And I have to say that I have the boring job in the office, and my students have the really fun job in the zoo. I'm always a little bit jealous. And the data were mainly recorded by my former PhD student, Julia Janikeyev, which is now a project manager in the US, and Sabrina Lin, which is now curator in the Zoo Frankfurt. And additionally, we had the possibility to go to the field, also with the support of the Serengeti-Park Foundation, which supported the travel costs for Daniela Lahn, and we were able to record also subjects in Uganda. And we try to analyze to look what is the difference maybe between zoo and field, because often I get the critic, what you find out in the zoo, can you transfer it to the field? Is it a real behavior and so on? And when we compare the data, we could confirm all the 5 call types where both studies agreed. We would suggest not to split up the 2 infant call types, but these are methodological issues. And we found them in zoo and in the field. The call type, which was related to the foraging, we found in the zoo and in the field. And the call type, one call type which is related to agonistic behavior, we found only in the zoo, although it was reported in the field. And we found it only in 3 zoos, which shows that it's not always maybe a matter of zoo or wildlife. It's also the matter whether you see the context in which the vocalization is produced. So currently we try also to compare the data. This is actual work, very fresh, by my bachelor student, Fiona. Here you can see the call rate for 4 of the most common call type, for zoos, for the field, and you see not much differences. For the snort, which are the foraging call types, here it's almost the same. The calls which were used in social interactions are slightly increased in captivity due to the fact that we have more social interactions in captivity. But in general, it's very similar. When we performed a statistic analysis, we found a difference between call types, we found a difference between sex and the usage of call types, but the place was non-significant. So, and this suggests that zoo and field data are very comparable, and this is a good signal because we discussed yesterday the role of zoos. Research is also important in zoos, and we can do some research in zoos. At first, it's more time and cost efficient, but we can also ask better, more detailed questions in zoos because we have more information about the animals, and we can track the animals much more better. Yes. Okay. How can we use this knowledge now to improve animal management? I have 2 suggestions.
We concentrated on one call type, that was the pand. Pand is a contact and a mating call. There's fantastic work by Ivana Zinkova on that. She already found out that a lot of information is encoded in the pand, and we were interested whether we can use the pand as an indicator of female oestrus. The reason is that in the southern white rhinoceros, cycling is a critical issue. So you have animals with 1 month cycle, with 2 month cycle, animals which have no regular cycle, or animals which have no cycle. Often the zoos do a hormone analysis, but then you get the results 3 months later. So when you have to make a decision on the day, this is not very helpful. And we thought maybe we can find a bioacoustic marker to signal oestrus in females. So in all the zoos we collected fecal sample. We analyzed them together with Jela Wouters and Martin Dehnhardt from Berlin. And what you can see, we collected sufficient sample of 15 females, but only 7 of them had a cycle. So also this shows the problem we have. Originally, we aimed to use the hormonal data to determine ovulation. This turned out that it was not working. So at the end, we go back to the good old behavioral indicators, mounting, copulation, and head placing. And we analyzed them at the day of oestrus, but also before and afterwards. So we found out that the pand rate increases on the day of oestrus, especially for the male. So one male was really good in panting, especially during the day of oestrus, but it was only significant for the males. For the females, they were a little bit lazy to increase it, but when they pant, then they pant when they were in oestrus. So therefore, we suggest that especially the male pant can be a very good indicator for bioacoustic monitoring. The interesting fact was that the females, in contrast to the males, increased their mating, their marking behavior. So the question is now, what triggers the pand calling? Is it maybe an olfactory cue? So maybe it's the pheromones that females distribute. And if this would be the case, then it might be also a nice tool for solitary animals which are not living all the time together. So this is something what we have to investigate in the future. Another idea we had was to help population management in Botswana. This is work by my former PhD student, Vera van der Stiel. She's now voluntary in the Zoo Frankfurt, and I co-supervised her bioacoustic part. And she was interested in how to improve translocation success. So we have in Botswana, rhinos were translocated from South Africa to Botswana. The problem is they do not know that they have to stay in the national park. So sometimes they leave, and especially when they are subadult and when they are females. So one idea was, can we use playbacks to attract or deter the rhinos to a specific area? So I have to say we did a very basic study at the moment. We just did a playback study. We had a control sound. It was a bird to check whether it's just the sound. And then we played back pants to attract the rhinos, and we played back hisses to deter the rhinos. And here you can see a playback. I'm not sure whether you can hear the sound, but then I have to do it. Okay, so this is then, it's going like, it's 3 times, so. No? I was too early, maybe. Yeah, that was the original sound. So maybe you can play it back again, then we can hear not my voice, but the start at least. So that. So this is the pand. A very noisy sound. So what I want to show you is that the animals really react to the conspecific sounds. and stronger than to the controls. So to the controls, they show no reaction. But the reaction was not so consistent across the sexes. So for example, the males run to the loudspeaker. So when it's one, then it's approaching the loudspeaker. For all conspecific calls, it's not so surprising because hisses are normally produced by females. So, I mean, a hiss is always a female, or mostly a female, so that's maybe not surprising. The females are a little bit more selective, so they avoided, for example, the loudspeaker when we played an unfamiliar pant call. So we need a little bit more development in this area, but we can show that playbacks have the potential to manipulate the behavior. But I have a little bit to be honest, because it was a very short time manipulation. So Vera tried to look after 1 hour, and after the behavior is changed for maybe 5 minutes after the playback. After 1 hour, she found nothing. So we need to explore this a little bit, how we can emphasize the reaction to the playback. One suggestion might be loops of playbacks or interactive playbacks, maybe also to select when a female is coming to play another playback than when a male is coming. So to sum up, I want to show you that the vocal repertoire is comparable between zoo and the field. We have a lot of information which are encoded in the vocalization, and I would like to bridge the basic research to applied perspectives. So a potential could be the male pant as a bioacoustic marker for female oestrus, and maybe we can also use playbacks to direct rhino movements. At the end, I have to say, research is always teamwork. This is what I think. It's not only the PhD students which take part, it's also a lot of master students, bachelor students, a lot of colleagues, and the zoos. And here I also want to emphasize the role of the zoos, because we started the project, when we started the project, the DFG was not convinced. So we started without money, and a lot of zoos offered us free accommodation, and by that we could collect the first data, and with the first data we could convince the DFG to support the study, and therefore I think it's also very important to promote the research in the zoo. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marina. We unfortunately again have time for only one question. So does anyone have any questions for her? Or anyone from the online? Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. I was just wondering if there's any evidence of rhinos using infrasound, and if there is, do you plan on looking at it?
Yes, I think it's mare. Okay, I think it's a mare. We use microphones which can record infrasounds. We never recorded infrasounds. They have the growl, which is a very aggressive call. So when they produce this call, then they really fight. This is a very low frequency call but around, I think the fundamental is around 30 hertz, but infrasound starts below 20 hertz. The thing with the infrasound, it's this one study which published that it's infrasound. It's a study, I think they have really cool equipment, but they did it in the zoo. They published only oscillograms. You have no relation to something, no context, so I'm not sure whether they really record a call or what else they record. And there's also the idea that giraffes have infrasound. It's from the same person. The idea came from the same person, and my colleagues in Vienna never recorded infrasound in giraffes. So the problem is that this study is often cited, and therefore it's in a lot of books that they produce infrasound, but I cannot support it, either in the field nor in the wild.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. Once more, please, for her. So now we're going to take a short 5-minute break, and we will be back, I think, between 11:20 and 11:25 at this point. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice break, and we'll see you in a little bit.